Hey, welcome back to the Fabricator stage. We're excited to get together. This is the first time we've used the stage all week. This is awesome.
Well, we all want to sit down.
We have a great panelist today. Going to be some great information. The last session we did on this was amazing. If you're having issues with quartzite, this is the place to be. Talking about the moisture, talking about different things that we're dealing with quartzite. And with that, everybody, if you could introduce yourselves, that would be great.
Look, we lined up in perfect order, too. I'm Mark Mario with the Natural Stone Institute. I lead our accreditation program, which is a credentialing program for fabricators and installers of natural stone. I also coordinate our safety committee, and I'm part of our education team. So we travel around with our friends, Stone World Magazine, and put together one-day workshops for fabricators around the country. I think the next one we're having, Jen, is Salt Lake next month in May. But you can visit our website or Stone World Magazine's website to learn more about those events, and hopefully they'll be coming to a city near you. I'll see you there. Without any further ado, I'll let Scott go on down the line.
Hi, my name is Scott Higginbotham. I am the Director of Product Management for Dry Treat ICP. I kind of grew up in the stone industry, dimensional stone, and went to college so I didn't have to work with stone, and you can see how that worked out for me. But we all have decades of experience, and this is a hot topic for everybody. So hopefully you'll learn and we'll be able to answer your questions.
I'm Denise Daniels with MB Stone Care and Supply. I'm Vice President and part owner. Been with the company about 12 years. We answer these questions about stone pretty much every day. So we hope we can get some information here.
Stu Rosen, owner of MB Stone. We manufacture a line of products as well as selling machines, and we're quite involved in the industry, especially with restoration. And look us up on the web if you have a chance.
And a little bit about the group. I know Blake's been great about introducing our sponsors of the stage and the events we're doing here during the week. Thank you all for attending. Hopefully we'll have some ideas that you can take away back to your shops and improve the processes and avoid some issues that you might encounter during fabrication installation. But the Natural Stone Institute, we have members all around the world. We represent any company in the stone industry, from quarriers to fabricators to landscape and distributors, commercial installers, restoration and maintenance, which Stu also has quite a bit of experience in, and then all the ancillary machinery, equipment, tooling suppliers that service those companies. What we do as an organization that is the biggest benefit to fabricators includes the standards information, the Dimension Stone Design Manual. So if you wanted to know what the industry standard, we've all heard that term industry standard, what is it? It's published in the Dimension Stone Design Manual. We have that available on our website and for order. We also do education, like I mentioned, and then the information and safety for companies. We do a lot of development and have a lot of resources that are free and open to both members and non-members, safety on the safety side. This session today, we're going to talk about some of the issues that some of you in the audience may be having. Maybe that's the reason you're here, with the quartzites and some of the staining and bleeding issues. We'll talk about those. I'm going to let the cat out of the bag and say we don't have a magic bullet that's going to be the 100% proven way to avoid or correct those, but we'll give you some techniques and ideas that hopefully will make you smarter about working with those materials and how to be more successful with those installations. And I'll open this up first just talking about what is quartzite. It's a metamorphic rock, meaning that it was fused together. It started as sandstone, it's fused together so sand becomes sandstone, becomes quartzite, as under high heat and pressure, those minerals are fused together. And we have a whole article on usenaturalstone.org, separate website from the Natural Stone Institute. A lot of great articles for both consumers and designers. It's in layman's terms. All of that information is available free of charge, no login. You can get right there, read those articles, and share them with learn yourself or share them with clients. But this article was put together by one of our good friends and their good friends, Karen Kirk, geologist out of Colorado. She made these beautiful little cartoony pictures to help explain these in simple terms. But Formation of quartzite, again, started out as sand. It gets layered over time and then compressed together. Groundwater carries other minerals, cementing those sand grains together. And then under high heat and pressure, it begins to recrystallize, and those little gaps, those pieces of sand start to fuse together and close up. And that's the good slide just to illustrate that point. So the little minerals are loosely packed, loosely bonded together, and then they metamorphize and it crystallizes and closes up. One of the great qualities about quartzite is it's extremely scratch resistant. I've got a picture of the Mohs hardness scale on here that is a relative scale of known minerals. One being talc, very soft mineral, all the way up to 10's not even on this chart, a diamond. Quartzites usually fall in that 7, high 6.5, 7. There's no, and this is not a linear scale. So 8 is not twice as hard as 4. All we know from this scale is that 8 is harder than everything below it. The higher the number, it's a harder mineral, harder substance than everything below it. But there are other scales that have that relativity. But quartzite being a 7 is considered very hard, very scratch resistant. And there's different varieties of quartzite. We've got a few images here, Calcutta, Macaubus, Taj Mahal, Blue Tahoe. The one on the left here, the fusion, is a little bit tricky. That's not what we would consider a true quartzite, but it does have some quartzite properties because it has some very identifiable bands of quartzite in those very stunning and visual folds of the material. So it will exhibit some properties of quartzite because there are quartz bands in it, but it may have other minerals, calcium-based, marble-like, so it may also have some properties of a marble. So we suggest that when you encounter materials like that, that you treat it to their weakest strengths and have your customers in cleaning and care and maintenance and treating them, treat it as the marble in that instance. And I mentioned the hardness scale. That's one of the reasons it's very desirable. It's incredibly scratch resistant, very hard to scratch, especially in a kitchen or flooring application with regular household implements. It does have and quartz, just by nature, the mineral silica and the quartz that makes up quartzites is extremely acid resistant. If you were here earlier and saw the Stone ID kit, if you use that acid on a piece of quartzite, it's not going to react at all. The only exception might be a very strong hydrofluoric acid, which would also etch glass. And in the article, I had some nice visuals about the cross bedding, the patterning that seems to be regular in quartzite. So you can't visually identify these and just look at something and say, oh, that's definitely a quartzite. But the article in Use Natural Stone does have some of the common patterning that you can expect to see in many quartzites, and that cross bedding is one of those features. And the reason, another benefit or reason they tend to be quite popular these days is they come in lighter colors that tend to be more marble-like, a little brighter in the homes these days, light grays and some of the lighter earth tones. I'm going to stop talking for a minute and let my friend Scott tell us about resining. Why do they resin? Why is resin applied? What does it do?
So I'm going to back up. Mark showed you some of those slides, and we're not talking about all quartzites, right? We're talking about the sandstone that becomes an intermediate or a quartzitic sandstone. Some of those stones don't get enough heat and pressure to fully form. So in order for those to be marketable, what do? We add resin, all right? We add resin in the block. We can vacuum bag them. They're also acid washed to get any of ferrous material that's out of there, because what do your clients want? White, gray, white, gray, gray, white, right? They want the same thing. They don't want the orange earth tones. So as you do these, they will fill any pits or holes with the resin, but it doesn't all get filled. There are areas in there that still have voids. And we'll get into those pictures, you know, and again, your suppliers, we didn't say this on Tuesday, but all these quartzites are not the same, and different suppliers are able to supply, usually from Brazil, different grades. Unfortunately, you don't know what the problem is sometimes until post-fabrication, and it's already in the home, and that's when your phone rings. But they're also acid washed and then dry. This is a slab oven. There's no one here selling slab ovens. These are customized things. But after you've resined them, you're having to get the moisture out of them. So this is where they do it. And they're mesh backed. If you look at the mesh, remember some of your mosaics would just have a mesh back, but most of these have a complete fiberglass back. So what do we do on a 6-sided piece of stone when we mesh the back of it? Completely cut off all ventilation from one side of it. And sometimes that's not just an entry point, that's an exit point for moisture. So again, after it's resin, acid washed, dried, etc.
And so that resin does provide a number of benefits. It does
Yes.
give us a nicer surface finish. It fills some of those surface voids. It does add some bit of strength in holding, bonding some of those looser minerals together.
The fill is going to fill in those voids. Most of them, when it first came out, again, most of these intermediate quartzites, it's very new to this industry. They haven't been in there for decades. You know, sometimes when we get these new stones that are created, we don't know what's going to happen, right? But also, we're starting to change the surfaces. Now, who are doing bush hammered, leathered. So what happens when you take a piece of material and you resin, you make it strong, and then you beat it with metal? You loosen it all back up again. So certain finishes of certain stones may react differently.
And this slide's meant to give you some ideas on how to prepare yourself just in selling the challenges that you should plan to encounter in fabrication. We talked about it being hard, very scratch resistant. It's going to be hard on your tooling and machinery as well. It's be slower to cut, slower to process. It's going to eat up more of your tooling or wear your tooling down faster. So one of the recommendations is to make sure you're covering your cost when you deal with these materials. And for those buying and specifying, make sure your client understands that there may be a higher price tag to fabricate and install these very, very hard to cut, hard to process quartzite. And the whole reason we're getting here is because it does have an affinity to soak up moisture, and we're going to talk about the types of quartzites that you can expect to see that occur. We want to make sure that you're pricing yourself correctly. We're all in business to make money, and if you're pricing it the same as you would a soft marble or a easy to cut manufactured material, there's a potential to lose money or not make the profit you expected. It'll really slow down your shop. And so to identify the problem, where's it going to occur?
Some of these problems can occur before fabrication when moisture gets in it. That's a good thing. If the slab already shows problems, pick another one. Sometimes these will happen during fabrication. I've seen them up to 9 months post-install. So 90 days have gone by, 120 days have gone by, you haven't got a call from your customer, and all of a sudden you don't even remember that customer because you're so busy, and they send you pictures. The one thing you're going to hear us say over and over again is time. So in your fabrication schedule, if you're doing granite, marble, man-made materials, and quartzites, you need to let the builder, the client, the specifier know that you need extra time. I know fabricators that have refused to cut quartzite anymore because they've gotten so frustrated. That's not really what we want, but you need to understand that you need extra time. If it's summer, sunny, winter, cloudy, if you live in the north, the south, geography, it can make a difference. So let the stone dry out, and don't give yourself a schedule because next Thursday the client wants the quartzite installed. You're going to have problems.
And so you talked about the acid bath. That's one of the things they're doing. So these are generally going to be the quartzites that we hear about issues occurring on tend to be the whites or lighter colored, light grays. Generally not the Taj Mahal or Madreperla, those more beigey. Those tend to be further along in that metamorphosis process where they're more tightly fused together, less absorbent. But these whites and grays also undergo an acid bath process in Brazil at most of the factories Scott mentioned. The reason being, in amongst that beautiful white quartz, there's also a natural occurring ferrous mineral, iron. What does iron do? It rusts. It turns yellow, turns orange. So they try to remove as much of that as possible before they resin it or before it's finished so that it doesn't have that affinity to turn orange. We'll see lots of cool photos of some of these things that happen in the field when that's not done correctly. The other point a friend of mine made, one of my Brazilian friends that has a geologist on staff here at the show, made was that not all factories are the same in where this material is coming from, mostly from Brazil. Some of them apply resin with a hand squeegee and air cured. Some of them have fully formed vacuum lines
yeah.
and drawing it in there. And some of them are very open and forthcoming about the resins and the processes they use. And so one of the points he wanted me to make sure we hammer home is make sure who you're buying from, your supply chain, make sure they're honest and open with what's happening to that slab before it gets to you, what products are being used, what's involved in their resining, the sealer, any additives or chemicals used in that process. The more honest ones, the more advanced ones are going to be really open about that process because they're getting the calls too. They're hearing about this material after the fact. I'm going to fly through these. These are more of the articles we have on the Use Natural Stone website. So this is one on talks about how sandstone, and here you can see some of that visual cross-bedding layers, the sandstone on top, and as it continues to mature, as it becomes a quartzite, you can see it becomes the more crystalline structure. And then we've got that mixed stone I talked about, the hybrid, if you will, like fusion and all
names
those.
change. You do realize that most of these stones have over a dozen or 24 names for the same exact thing. You could put the word Blanco in front of all of it, and that kind of covers the spectrum. But you also have to remember in factories, some of this is in the quarried in the north of Brazil. Some of it is in the south. If you look at the clay and the dirt, these are open pit quarries. So not just the ferrous material, there's also organic material in the quarries. And that is natural. I know sometimes people want something that's pure white and they don't want to see orange, but that is natural. And that's the acid washing helps with those colors, but also you have to neutralize acid or it will reactivate. But also sometimes because there's voids, there could be ferrous material that is not seen but works its way to the top, right? So it is something just to prepare your customer that, things can happen.
I think this is the reason, a picture like this is probably the reason many of you are here. Is that true? Any of you seen this? I'm smiling, but I'm really not smiling on the inside. That's the whole reason we're bringing this up, talking about it, because we know it's a unfortunate, common occurring situation. So the reason this is happening, another reason, contributor to why this is happening is we talked about the resining. So we've effectively changed the absorption properties on that surface layer. It's not totally sealing it off, but it's definitely changing the natural absorption and transmissibility in and out through that top layer. Now we've got a mesh, resin-on mesh backing on the bottom. That usually is a pretty heavy coating, so you're effectively blocking that bottom face of the slab. And that's there for a reason too. It's there to help during transport and handling, getting it through to and through your shop and to installation. But you effectively have two layers where you've changed the surface properties absorptively on that material.
Don't
So
forget
what
the
happens,
edge.
and then it hits the shop, and you guys get to cut the edges.
That's where the problem starts.
So that edge doesn't have that resin layer on there. You just freshly cut into raw natural stone. Now it's got a path. Moisture I'm talking about has a path to go in or out of that stone. And so that's why we see this phenomenon occurring at cut edges after it's been cut or processed through your shop. I can go picture after picture. You've got many more of these.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody else does. You get those on your phone on Friday afternoon from a customer. And I'll be honest with you, I've seen this probably for the last 6 or 7 years, and I'll tell you that sometimes a poultice works, sometimes a poultice will not work. Sometimes a heat gun will work, sometimes a heat gun will not work. Sometimes a solvent. So the problem is that once that water is introduced during fabrication, because of the hardness of the material, it's going to marinate on those saws for a while, right? Water always wants to go to a drier area. So once that water gets in that material, by doing the edges, the punch holes, the sink cutouts, now you're opening up airflow for that water to start traveling through that material, right? It can't get out the bottom unless you cut the mesh out. It's not going to get usually to the top. It's going to find the least passive resistance. And it's not clean water. It's not drinkable water that you're going through the material. And that's where you'll get the problems. Same thing with oil stains, with seams. And Mark, we're going to wait, talk about things to do later or during? Or
yeah, we're still, we can flip through these. We're identifying the problem. These are just unfortunate pictures that have been shared with us over the last couple of years. We've been talking about this. So this is a new install, hasn't even been used yet. I don't know if this is dabs of silicone that are bleeding from the bottom up. I honestly don't.
Well, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So,
So-
here you go.
Sometimes, so, when we look at all these, the customer sees them as, quote, stains, discolorations. It looks ugly, and that's why we're all right here. But, we've had luck with pre-sealing, but you're sealing one side. The other six sides, other five sides. Sorry, it's Thursday, I can't count to six. They're still not protected. But the one thing is time. If you can let the material dry out, okay? Once you cut it, if you jump in and you start finishing the edges, what are you doing to those edges? You're closing them back up. So run it through the saw, get it out there, let it dry out. If you're in a geographic area where you can use the sun, that is going to be your best. Let the sun do the work. Keeping it with airflow. Don't stack a bunch of pieces on a cart. It's not going to breathe. We've had good luck with taking about 4 to 6 inches off the edges and taking a grinding wheel and grinding it off.
So you're talking about the back mesh.
The back mesh.
So
That's going to let that escape because the water that's in that slab, it's going to find that open area. And if it gets an area on the edges, if it can come out the bottom, the top, the side, doesn't matter, just get it out of there, it won't get trapped. Because one of the things we've looked at is when you start finishing the edges, you create heat and friction, and maybe you're melting some of that resin and closing off. That's why it's getting trapped in those edges.
And none of these are single shot guarantees. These are just ideas that have been shared with me and Scott and Stu and Denise from fabricators. Some of them swear by sealing it prior to any fabrication.
Fabricators, they all got a secret trick they don't want to share with anybody, right? That they Wikipedia'd day before yesterday. But the whole idea is that you're working with material that could cause problems. In your shops, if you're doing a marble, if you're doing granite, you might have some problems every now and then, but this is something that I know guys that they'll cut 10 bundles and never have anything go wrong, and so they just keep doing the same process, and then all of a sudden they get that one bundle, and then all of a sudden it's just like wildfire, right? It's not inexpensive material. Your clients are not paying low money for it, so their expectation level is going to be a little bit higher than just a stock builder.
And so the second comment about not storing it horizontally, that means don't leave it wet on the machines or on the pods or on tables with moisture pooled on that surface. It means have it set where you can have air circulating over there where you can get it to dry.
Humidity, dehumidifiers, fans, heaters, anything to get airflow going.
If you've got the space available, we've got one of our members who has a old Connex container they've taken on their property, completely enclosed that, insulated it, and set up a dehumidification room, if you will. And so he says he had, again, another possible solution. He says he had success where he can put carts of material in there that are spaced out overnight, and he effectively dries them out in that very, very low humidity environment.
Yeah, if you think about it, this is no different than environmental restoration. If a flood comes and your carpet gets wet, what do? You got to get airflow in there to dry it out. So the same thing with the slabs.
So things like this, stacking pieces tightly on a cart versus having some space where you can have airflow between those pieces, having them open on a table and not flooded and sitting with moisture on the surface. Let's talk about the chemicals and adhesives that people are using.
Yeah, so every shop has their favorite chemicals from their favorite supplier.
What's your favorite chemical?
3 guesses.
I'm a rum guy. No, it's when, again, we have water in there, and we talked about this yesterday. So, putting more water-based products is probably not a good idea at the time when you're trying to get the water out. So a solvent base is a good opportunity. You can all practice. Every time you do a countertop, you have leftover pieces, you have sink cutouts. So you have material that you can test on to find out. Your epoxies may work on everything but a certain material. Do your testing first, I
don't know. Those guys have a non-bleeding adhesive. They've got a non-bleeding adhesive. They have a non-bleeding adhesive. Go visit them all. Your favorite brands. They all have different versions of adhesives and chemicals for different different situations. So call the reps like Scott, ask them for their preferences. Hey, I've got a very thirsty material, very absorptive material. I want to avoid this bleeding. What can you recommend? Other best practices we've heard, you had that mesh wheel yesterday to remove that mesh back, and we talked about that.
Alpha's got a mesh wheel over there. You can buy them in,
so you guys
4,
are cutting
6, 8
into
inch.
that raw natural edge, creating a path for water to enter and hopefully escape. But just removing that one of those layers, that mesh on the back, if you can.
With PPE, because now you're grinding fiberglass,
Yep.
guys.
Yep. But give that moisture, that stain, if you will, give it another path to escape before you put it in that dehumidifying environment. Different ways to encourage drying. AC, condition that air. Pull the moisture out of the air. Have a dehumidifier, air conditioner. Have dry heat. I usually recommend against open flame heat because one of the byproducts of burning fuel is water vapor. You don't see it, but you're effectively throwing more water at that bad situation that you're trying to remove the water. So
Don't use
dry
a torch.
heat, electric heat, dehumidification, and in general ventilation, just keeping that air moving. And the biggest one,
Time. You may want to look on when you're putting quotes out that depending on your production schedule, hey, this is what I'm running the next 30 days. If 2 quartzite jobs get in there, you have to do 2 things. You're going to have to mess everybody else's schedule up, or you're going to have to that one customer and tell them they're going to have an extended.
and consumers want everything instantly. I understand that.
Yeah. But time, these pictures here, they didn't want to hear it, but eventually after 30 days it dried out. Now the scary thing is, I'm not going to stand here and say just give everything 30 days and you'll be fine, because you won't. Maybe 9 out of 10 times, and the 10th one will bankrupt you. So you want to make sure that, if the customer calls you, how many people here are in the restoration business? That's what I thought. You're in the fabrication business, right? So these people are in the restoration business. Completely different industry, right? So the whole idea.
But you guys get the calls too.
Yeah,
We get
everybody
we
gets
get a
the
lot
calls.
of calls.
Yeah. But the whole idea is,
We
fixing
talked
this
about
stuff.
that acid process, So this is what happens when that acid is not neutralized, and some of those ferrous
Yeah.
minerals are
Gets wet.
still remaining in that stone. There's still some residual acid that gets reactivated with cleaners and just regular cleaning chemicals. So you can see some of that yellowing.
We had a customer yesterday that I talked to that from Michigan, and she was having problems, and they did a pH test, and her tap water, because she didn't have a filtration system, was 6.2. That's not crazy acidic, but over time, with a rag washing, you're pulling those ferrous materials up. But again, there's that one gambit where we have a mystery resin that we don't know what the properties are that are in this material that could obviously accelerate this.
And this is one you gave me. It's holding on to a sample piece.
Yeah, having a sample piece. I mean, if you want to start a catalog for all your jobs and file them, if you have room, you can do that. But here's one where, well, why didn't the cutting board piece do that? Well, the cutting board piece is a small piece it was cut out. It's got plenty of airflow, it came from the same slab as the one underneath, but it was, just treated differently. Glue, cutting. You never really see it in the back. What you'll notice is you'll see it around the edges, you'll see it in the seams, you'll see it around the cut marks, but because when you put that slab up against it and usually put a backsplash off, you cut all the air circulation out. So water's not stupid. Water will go this way and say, oh, wait a minute, it's easier to come back this direction and get out.
So it's usually not trying to escape towards the wall. It's
Right.
going to come out.
But it doesn't mean you can't get one. It's not common.
Yeah, much less common. There's other phenomenon like this streaking. This one's harder to see, but I don't know. Did you figure out what's going on here? There is some streaking from front to back on this one. You may see it in that left photo.
The hardest thing is once it comes in the client's house, you all get the client calls. No one's used the kitchen. I've only had water in there. I mean, there's a million things that they tell you. The longer it is in the home, the more difficult it is from your standpoint to try to figure out what's going on, because we don't understand if this is just bad maintenance, poor expectations. This slab here is one of my favorite. That poor thing didn't even make it to the house. All those fissures, if you look at the veining's going this way, but with the fissures you can see it's going perpendicular. It could have happened during transit, could have been moved around.
It could have been one of those natural voids where there used to be iron minerals and they were removed, but now
Yeah.
there's a vacancy left behind.
Yeah, when you cut a 50-ton block, we used to say, is the creme in the middle or the creme on the outside? You're slicing the piece, and you don't know where the better piece is. Is it the core or the perimeter? Different colors, yeah.
Another one of these instances where time is your friend. We like to reinforce that. So when it was installed, you can see a great vein match. You know they're from opposing slabs. They were side by side in that bundle, the same material. But there's a clear noticeable difference when it was installed on the left. That piece on the right is considerably darker. We don't know why, but given time, given patience, it did even out, it did lighten up. So in wrapping up, like I said from the beginning, we don't have a one-size-fits-all solution that'll cure 100% of these problems 100% of the time. But just understanding more about what's occurring, what's going on, some of the techniques hopefully we've shared today, and I continue to get ideas from other fabricators that have helped them. We'll continue to share these as we talk about this subject over and over. But just educate yourselves about those, know which materials that are likely to have issues like this. Also understand best practices, drying strategies at installation, make sure you're using the correct adhesives and sealers, and then some of the techniques for, we didn't talk about that, so Stu, take a minute, have you successfully corrected some of these issues post-install?
These issues have just been very, very hard to remove. I mean, you all know that you can go and work on them, it's just a lot of time, and not very successful results. So sometimes you can, but mostly it's been very, very difficult to work with.
It hits your pride. When you do a poultice and you get it out, you think, all right, I've won. And then you go to the next hole, and it doesn't do anything, and you failed.
It's a lot of testing and a lot of time, and the loss of customer confidence, and everybody wants to get moving, and these things, they don't move too fast. So.
Yeah, I used to tell everybody that's one of the beauties of natural stone is that if it is absorptive, if it does have a stain, if something goes in, there's usually a method or a technique to get it to reverse and come back out. It may take more than one step, or it may not occur instantly like people wish. That's usually the case. Here it's much, much more challenging because of the physical things going on within that quartzite. So, like you said, I've heard mixed results from folks. Some of the restoration guys won't even touch it. Oh, it's a quartzite. I'm not even going to come look at that.
You guys understand how a poultice works. It works just like a stain. Well, if you can't pull down because that resin is getting in the way, then that's why it can't pull. Maybe the water's getting trapped underneath the resin but above the stone, and it can't pull all the way through. We have a white page on our website at drytreat.com that we've made, and it really helps fabricators because your clients listen to you, and sometimes they're looking at you like you're just feeding me a line. I never heard of this before, or your builder, whoever it is. But we have a white page that we send the link out just so it's like, hey, listen, this is something that can happen. It's got pictures, it's got explanations, it's 2 pages, so it's easy. The Natural Stone Institute has plenty of information on this and more in depth. You have the recording from the last year.
Yeah, we did the first version. That's what I recall, and this one revisited because we did one almost 2 years ago now where we initially started looking at these issues when they popped up. And some of these techniques are things we learned back then that people were telling us were effective. Some of them I've added and we've updated and continue to share this information with fabricators and restorers as we learn more about it.
It's not a good business practice to go out and do work without predictable results. So it's like sort of a crapshoot going out there, and witchcraft for sure. When it works, it's witchcraft. When it doesn't work, you're in serious trouble, and you're wasting your time. You're not getting paid, and as fabricators, it's having to replace the material or just not deal with the client anymore, which is never a good situation. So.
Well, I want to thank my friends coming up here, Denise, Stu, Scott. Thanks for giving us your input and things you guys have shared and learned. We'll have time for a few questions. If Blake, you want to run out there if anybody has any of these questions.
that one picture you had where you have the book match and one's dark and one's light, do you recommend, and probably the restoration people, do you recommend not trying to darken the one side because maybe the other side will lighten
Never
up?
use an enhancer to try to match something, your odds. I've done it and I've seen it done, but it's a gamble. Because what happens if you enhance the other side and the other side dries out?
Yeah, it's really good for like
Yeah,
10 minutes, and
Yeah.
then you're in trouble.
Yeah. Now the way that picture was, it, there was a seam right there. Again, if you install it correctly, you shouldn't be able to take it apart real easy and let it breathe. There's an advantage to poor installation, easy removal.
Yeah, so if you end up in a situation like this, ideally on the underside, if possible, you would remove that mesh if it exists on the underside. Give that moisture or that darkening another path to escape, and it'll help that improve. All right, Paul, hit us.
I was just the same picture, same question, but if you were to hone the whole surface, get rid of the sealer on there, would it eventually dry out the same? Is that what you can?
But get rid of what, the resin?
The resin and the sealer?
The sealer's not doing anything because we don't know if that's sealed or not sealed. But the
Yeah.
whole idea is that resin's not just at the top. It's different from some of the Indian slabs and stuff
Yeah.
that used to, they would, like back in the 90s and stuff. But the whole idea is that you could hone it, but that resin's going all the way through the 3 cm in certain capacity. But to your
if it
Paul,
was-
it
if
would
it was a
open it
moi-
up.
if
It
it-
opened the pores up to
Yeah,
let
if it was a
breathe.
moisture issue and you saw that happening on one side,
Right.
could you hone the whole surface and have them dry out? Would help it get an even hone to it? And
It's very hard
you're-
to do that because how deep do you have to go? You have to cup wheel the one side, and
Right.
then, you have like a sandblasted portion, and
Yeah, and that's in a
you know,
corner.
and at best it would probably get blotchy. You know.
That's where you put a coffee maker.
Any other questions?
The cutting board.
Best time to use sealer after fabrication, or I heard.
Well,
like-
it's got to be. So here's the trick. For any sealer, it's got to be dry. Use a moisture meter. Don't use your hand to see if it's wet. Use a moisture meter. If you're cutting this material, get a moisture meter reading before it gets cut. Get a moisture meter reading after it gets cut, after it gets edged and everything else, and see where you're at and see if it's drying. Because some of the times it may be wet, but it may not be dark. It may not have gone to the surface yet, so you may have kept it. Use that moisture meter to understand it. Some people like to pre-seal it. But again, if you pre-seal it, it's probably dry because it hasn't been fabricated. After you fabricate it, you got to let it dry out.
Right.
I know some people that are installing it and telling the homeowner, "Be careful, I'll be back in 3 or 4 weeks." Well, good luck with that way of doing it.
Yeah, I don't think
Yeah.
there's any cure for that. I mean, it's possibilities to pre-seal it, but then, like Scott said, you're cutting it, and then all the cutouts are going to
Yeah.
take in water, and it could make it even worse.
All right. Thanks.
Yes.
So I have a job that was supposed to be 18 by 18 mud set porcelain in Montana, and they sent me. I just noticed like 3 weeks ago. It's Quartzite 24 by 24, 3 cm mud set with probably a 1/4 inch grout joint,
Indoors or outdoors?
Outdoor pool?
pool and patios.
Billings, Montana?
Yeah.
Did you get a Corey report on it for the freeze thaw?
No, it just
Might be a
came
good
in.
idea.
Yeah. But my question is, I lived in Florida 30 years, so I did marble and cast stone outside. And one job I had, it bled on a seashell cast stone job. It was 2 cm also. It bled 2 inches in, but only in the sun and not in the shade. So my question is that quartzite going to bleed where it's grouted? Do you think? Does that have to be pre-sealed?
Yeah, well, it depends on the quartzite you're talking about, right? So the intermediate quartzites, I can give you my card and we can talk about it offline. But yeah, if it's going on a concrete bed or using a moisture barrier, there's a lot of premium polymer thin set versus mud. I mean, there's a billion different questions.
Yeah, is it going to be slabs that you receive and have to cut into that 18 by 18, or is it processed at the factory? Is it meshed back? I don't know. That's some of the things.
It was supposed to be porcelain. It wasn't
Supposed to be
even
porcelain, but is it still raw material back?
It's
Is it
already
open?
pre-cut and
Especially if
palleted.
it's mud set and you've got a natural back. I mean, there's going to be a path for moisture to escape in that type of installation. But if it's got that resin mesh backing, that's another layer of unpredictability.
if they're cutting them in 24 by 24s, I haven't pulled them open, but I wouldn't think they'd be matched back.
I would not anticipate it, but that's why. Take a look at it. Yeah, it was supposed to be porcelain. Yeah.
I would test them.
I like the fact that it went from porcelain to natural stone. I think that's great.
I would test it and see what the results are. Test it for porosity. Well, do like a mock-up.
Pull a piece out, put it in a water bath, see if you see the absorption issues like we showed on these slides here. See if it'll dry back out naturally, easily.
And Stu, what else is testing facilities that they can use as well, or?
Testing facilities, I think, yeah, I mean, yes, you could, but I think you have the material right on site. You could make up a Wonderboard mock-up and just, you don't have to use a whole piece. Cut a piece, put some pieces in, install them, just the way you would do it on the job site, and see what actually happens. I think you'd do fine pre-sealing them, or better maybe. All 6 sides.
And again, correct me if I'm wrong,
seal.
but make sure it's dry before you seal it.
Yeah, if it's sitting in the crates and, sideways under a tree in the shade and it's been sitting there, it's probably not dried out. You got to get it out. Well, good. Even better. It's probably, do a mock-up. Yeah.
If you seal the bottom,
Hello. Is
Premium
Cristallo-
polymer. You have to use a premium polymer thin set.
That always seems to be, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Premium polymer thin set's what you got to use. Yeah, that's the industry standard, and
Is Cristallo considered a quartzite?
And your mock-up will tell you that too.
So the question was, is Cristallo considered a quartzite?
I mean, the names of here's the thing we fall into. Each supplier has different names of everything. And so, normally the similar names could mean, but you have to do a test. Years ago, remember that evil word, soft quartzites, that was out there? Yep. It was shorter than dolomitic marble, but they just call it soft Yeah. They're real pliable quartzites. You can bend them. No, that's a fake name. So the whole idea is you have to understand what it is and do a test on it. And, an acid test is the first thing because that's going to come out is there any calcite in it? Nope. Okay, well, check that box and then move from there.
Yeah, these sessions are being recorded. You can also refer back. Stu and Denise had a great session. Was it last session where they talked about identifying the different acid tests and hardness tests? And even though it might be labeled or sold to you as a quartzite, you still got to figure out what is the hardness of this material, what is the reactiveness to acid, because there's a huge umbrella when it comes to quartzite, when it comes to all of this stuff. And you could have the same color react different ways based on different different slabs.
And where it comes from.
Correct.
Thank you for your work. When you talked about taking the fiberglass and the epoxy off on the back side of a stone, and hypothetically then you process it and then you dry it, are you thinking about sealing the back of the stone and the front of the stone?
You can. I mean, when you're doing one of the things that often gets missed in kitchen fabrication is where is the trouble zone? The trouble zone is left or right of the stove and the sink. We're not doing a lot of drop-in sinks anymore. They're usually undermount. It's a good idea to seal the bottom around those sinks so water doesn't splash up the other way. And also, the edges next to the stove are the most important. If you look at any kitchen installation guide for a stove, it will almost always tell you to have a different height than the countertop, which the customer does not want. They want it level. And also the sizes. I don't know how many of you guys have, squeaked in a range that maybe was a little tight. That's your trouble areas. And even around faucet punch holes. I've seen soap dispensers. One of the biggest nightmares is a crack in a soap dispenser and the homeowner just keeps pumping it for 6 months. And then you have a stain the size of a hubcap, So it's good to get in those little, those cuts are open.
Any other questions? Any other takeaways? I know one of my biggest takeaways from this has been, from a process perspective, I really like the idea of the dehydration chamber or dehydration place. So fabricate it, dry it out, and then seal it, and then install it. For making sure that it's completely dry. And I think yesterday they
Blake,
mentioned.
Scott mentioned some of our friends in Florida. I get these calls from all over the country. So our fabricator friends in Florida are like, oh, we don't have that problem.
Put it outside. Yeah.
They put it outside in the sun when it's not going to rain.
Yep.
When it's not rainy day, when it's rain's not in the forecast, but they put it out in the full sun and it tends to dry out very quickly just from that solar heating. But in other climates, my friend was in southern Illinois, I think, that set up that drying chamber.
But time, like Scott had mentioned, dry it, and then seal it.
Just again, in your businesses, you just have to stop for a second and say, this is just a little bit different than the other things that we are fabricating.
Any other takeaways? Any other questions? Hey, let's give our panel a round of applause. Thank you. That was